Hi, this is Mr. Johns, and we're going to talk about food chains and food webs. I'm reading this from Kahn Academy's website, and you can see the website location below. A food chain, which is over here on the left, is pretty straightforward. We have the sun, and the sun gives energy to the plant, and then the mouse eats the plant, that gives it energy. And the snake eats the mouse, that gives him energy, and the eagle eats the snake, and that gives the eagle energy. And so where does this all originate from? It all starts from the sun. But in the other section, we're talking about food webs. And on food webs, you can see we have a level here, we have a level here, we have another level here, another level here. But in reality, they eat lots of things, and they eat many things, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The key points in this video are: producers or autotrophs make their own organic molecules. Consumers or heterotrophs get organic molecules by eating other organisms. So again, producers or autotrophs make their own food, so that would be plants. And consumers, so this would be plants. So producers, we know they make their own food, so those are like plants. And consumers are heterotrophs, which is what we are. These were things that eat plants, things that can't make their own foods, things that cannot eat, I shouldn't say eat their own food, but make their own food. She cannot make their own food. We're also going to talk about the food chain. A food chain is a linear sequence of organisms through which nutrients and energy pass as one organism eats another. So again, this is going to be one where we're going to be at one level, which is going to be obviously the producer's level. And then we move up the food chain. In a food chain, each organism occupies a different trophic level, defined by how many energy transfers separate from basic input of the chain. Food webs consist of many interconnected food chains and are a more realistic representation of consumption relationships in ecosystems. Energy transfers between trophic levels is inefficient. With a typical efficiency around 10%, this inefficiency limits the length of food chain. What this says is, in between those different levels, so we have a producer down here, and then we have here, which was the primary, so let me write it down, producer. We have primary consumer. And then we have secondary consumer. This receives 100% energy. We lose 10% as we go up. So each time we go up to a different level, so this would be 80%. Every time we go up a different level, we lose 10%. 10% of the energy. Introduction. Organisms of different species can interact in many ways. They can compete, or they can be symbionts. Symbionts are things that live together. So they're long-term partners with a close association. Or, of course, it can do what we so often see in nature programs. One of them can eat the other. Chomp. That is, they can form one of the links in a food chain. In ecology, a food chain is a series of organisms that eat one another, so that energy and nutrients flow from one to the next. For example, if you had a hamburger for lunch, you might be part of a food chain that looks like this: grass, cow, human. Because we get the sun gives the energy to the grass, the cow eats the grass, and we eat the cow in the hamburger. But what if you had lettuce on your hamburger? In that case, we've shortened down the food chain. You're also part of the food chain that looks like this: lettuce, human. So we became more into the, so here We have the producer, we have the primary consumer, and then us. So at this point in time, we are the third level. We're third, so that means we lost. So if this was 100% of the energy level, the cow gets 90, we get 80. Now, if we move down here to this chain, we're second. We're now second. We are now a primary consumer. So if this is 100, we're now at 90% of receiving all the energy. And remember this one here, we had primary, so this is going to be secondary. Secondary consumer. And this example illustrates we can't always fully describe what an organism such as human eats with one linear pathway. For situations like the one above, we may want to use a food web that consists of many interacting food chains and represents the different things an organism can eat and be eaten by. In this article, we're going to take a closer look at food chains and food webs to see how they represent the flow of energy and nutrients through the ecosystem. Autotrophs versus heterotrophs. We've talked about this before, but what basic strategies do organisms use to get food? Some organisms, called autotrophs, also known as self-feeders, can make their own food. That is, their own organic compounds out of simple molecules like carbon dioxide. There are two basic types of autotrophs. So again, these are plants. So remember the plants receive the energy from the sun. And if we give them some kind of water, that was H2O, and we give them some CO2, then that was going to produce some sugar and some oxygen. So we have photoautotrophs, such as plants, use energy from sunlight to make an organic compound, sugars, out of carbon dioxide. In photosynthesis, other examples of autotrophs include algae and cyanobacteria. Then we have something called chemoautotrophs. They use energy from chemicals to build organic compounds out of carbon dioxide or similar molecules. This is called chemosynthesis. For instance, there are hydrogen sulfide oxidizing chemoautotrophic bacteria found in undersea vents, communities where no light can reach. So this is the stuff that's at the bottom of the ocean. This chemo is stuff that happens at the bottom of the ocean. They're self-feeders, but they're made through chemosynthesis. And phototrophs, photo meaning sun, or light I should say, means light. And it happens through photosynthesis. Autotrophs are the foundation of every ecosystem on the planet. They may sound dramatic, but it's no exaggeration. Autotrophs form the base of food chains and food webs, and the energy they capture from the light or chemical sustains all the other organisms in the community. When we're talking about their role in food chains, we can call autotrophs the producers. Okay, we've talked about that. Heterotrophs, also known as other feeders, autotrophs, self-feeders, heterotrophs, other feeders, can't capture light or chemical energy to make their own food of carbon dioxide. Humans are heterotrophs. Instead, heterotrophs get organic molecules by eating other organisms or their byproducts. Animals, fungi, and many bacteria are heterotrophs. When we talk about heterotrophs, role in food chains, we can call them consumers. As we will see shortly, there are many different kinds of consumers with different ecological roles, from plant-eating insects to meat-eating animals to fungi that feed on debris and waste. So we'll look at the full cycle. Food chains. Now we can take a look at how energy and nutrients move through ecological community. Let's start by considering just a few who relationships by looking at a food chain. A food chain is a linear sequence of organisms through which nutrients and energy pass one organism each another. Let's look at the parts of a typical food chain starting from the bottom, the producers, and moving upward. At the base of a food chain lie the primary producers. The primary producers, so I'm going to draw a picture here. There's going to be a picture coming up, but we're going to draw that picture. So at the bottom, we have the producers. And they're the plants. The primary producers are autotrophs, so we're back up here. The primary producers are autotrophs and are most often photosynthetic organisms such as plants, algae, or cyanobacteria. The organisms that eat the primary producers are called primary consumers. Primary consumers are usually herbivores. They're plant eaters. They may be algae eaters or bacteria eaters. So that's this section right here. So this is going to be primary consumers. Well, primary consumers. And they're going to be herbivores. You read that right? They're herbivores because they're only going to eat plants. They're only going to eat plants. And the organisms that eat the primary consumers are called secondary consumers. So if they only eat up here, this is secondary. I'm just going to write secondary. Second consumers. Consumer, they just erased on me. And they're going to be carnivores because they only eat meat. They're only going to eat, they're herbivores, and so they're only going to eat some kind of meat. The organisms that eat the secondary consumers are called tertiary consumers. Tertiary means three. These are carnivore-eating carnivores like eagles or big fish. Some food chains have additional levels such as a quaternary consumers, which means fourth level. Carnivores that eat tertiary consumers, organisms at the very top of the food chain, are called apex consumers. Apex consumers because, what do you call the top of the food chain? What do you call this section right here? This is the apex. That means the peak. The peak of the mountain is the apex. The peak of a graph is the apex. So we're looking at the apex. We can see examples of these levels in the diagram below. So that's on the next slide. The green algae are primary producers that get eaten by mollusks. The primary consumers, the mollusks, then become lunch for the slimy sculpin fish. A secondary consumer, which is a self-eaten by a larger fish, the Chinook salmon, and a tertiary consumer. So here we go down here at this bottom. Again, if you had this as a big, let's see if I can do this. If I had some big diagram here, we would have the primary consumer, which is the plant, the things that are self-feeding, and then we have these herbivores that eat off of the primary producers, and then we have the slimy sculpin, which is a secondary consumer, which eats the primary consumer, and then we have the top part here, which is going to be the Chinook salmon, and he's going to eat the slimy sculpin. Each of the categories above is called a trophic level, and it reflects how many transfers of energy and nutrients, how many consumption steps separate an organism from the food chain's original energy source, such as light. As we'll explore further below, assigning organisms to trophic levels isn't always clear-cut. For instance, humans are omnivores that can eat both plants and animals. Decomposers. One other group of consumers deserves mention, although it does not always appear in drawings of food chains. The group consists of decomposers, organisms that break down dead organic material and waste. Decomposers are sometimes considered their own trophic level. As a group, they eat dead matter and waste products that come from organisms at various other trophic levels. For instance, they would happily consume decaying plant matter, the body of a half-eaten squirrel, or the remains of a deceased eagle. In a sense, the decomposer's level runs parallel to the standard hierarchy of primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. Fungi and bacteria are the key decomposers in many ecosystems. They use the chemical energy in dead matter and waste to fuel their metabolic processes. Other decomposers are detritivores. Detritus eaters or debris eaters, these are usually multicellular animals such as earthworms, crabs, slugs, or vultures. They not only feed on dead organic matter, but often fragment it as well, making it more available for bacterial or fungal decomposers. So we talked about, if you remember on Monday, I asked you what was a detritivores. And detritivores are what? They're detritus eaters, and they eat, or debris eaters. So they like to eat dead animals, or dead things that are dead. And that's things like earthworms, crabs, slugs, and vultures. Decomposers as a group play a critical role in keeping ecosystems healthy. When they break down dead material and waste, they release nutrients that can be recycled and used as building blocks by primary producers. So let's talk about food webs. Food webs are food chains that give us a clear-cut picture of who eats whom. However, some problems come up when we try and use them to describe whole ecological communities. For instance, an organism can sometimes eat multiple types of prey to be eaten by multiple predators, including ones at different trophic levels. This is what happens when you eat a hamburger patty. The cow is a primary consumer, and the lettuce leaf on the patty is a primary producer. To represent these relationships more accurately, we can use a food web, a graph that shows all the trophic eating-related interactions between various species in an ecosystem. The diagram below shows an example of a food web from Lake Ontario. Primary producers are marked in green, primary consumers in orange, secondary consumers in blue, and tertiary consumers in purple. So here's our primary producers. Here's our first level. These are our producers. And now we're going to start up the food chain level. So here's primary. Here's secondary. Here's tertiary. Okay, and all these levels lose 10%. So in accounting, we do this as a loss, or you do this in math, use a negative number. So you lose 10%, you lose 10%, you lose 10%. Guess I should put my percent sign there. Let's get that percent sign down over here. So by the time we get up to this rainbow trout, he has to eat a lot more food. He's only getting, so we have 100, we have 90, 80, 70. They're only getting 70% of the energy that was originally done from the plant. In food webs, arrows point from an organism that is eaten to the organism that eats it. As the food web above shows, some species can eat organisms from more than one trophic level. For example, opossum shrimp eat both primary producers and primary consumers. Bonus question. This food web contains the food chain we saw earlier in this article: green algae, mollusks, slimy, sculpin, salmon. Can you find it? So let's go back. And we have the green algae here. And then we have the mollusks, which we already talked about. That's there. Then the slimy sculpin is here. And the last one was the Chinook salmon. So we can see the different levels there, but this is what it really kind of more or less looks like. This also talked about the shrimp, the opossum shrimp, which also can eat the actual algae itself. So you can see where they have this green line that contains all the way down to the very bottom. So again, if the green line shows that that's what eats the different algae, then that's what this opossum shrimp looks like. It actually goes all the way down to eats down here the producers. Grazing versus detrital food webs. Food webs don't usually show decomposers. You might have noticed that the Lake Ontario food web above does not yet. All ecosystems need ways to recycle dead material and waste. That means decomposers are indeed present, even if they don't get much airtime. For example, in the meadow ecosystem shown below, there is a grazing food web of plants and animals that provides inputs for detrital food web of bacteria, fungi, and detritivores. The detrital web is shown in simplified form in the brown band across the bottom of the diagram. In reality, it would consist of various species linked by specific feeding interactions, that is, connected by arrows as in the grazing food web above ground. Detrital food webs can contribute to energy to grazing food webs as when a robin eats an earthworm. Okay, let's try to figure out what this means. If I am down here at the bottom, I'm going to eat, and you just look at the brown. So here's our plants. So in this case, it shows this arrow, meaning that the squirrel is going to eat the plants. The mouse is going to eat plants. The bird eats something that's a producer, usually seeds that come from plants. And then we have a bug that eats off of plants. Then we have things that eat the bugs. We have spiders. We have this ugly thing here. And then we also have the birds that eat the spiders. We have the frog that can eat the spiders, can eat the bugs. The bird can eat the bugs. And then we have the snake that eats the bird, that eats the frogs, that eats the snakes, eats the spiders. The owl can eat other birds. The owl can eat the mouse. The fox can eat these things as well. But all these things end up dying eventually. And when they die, we have things that will take care of it, so they don't have a whole bunch of dead things laying around in the ground. And so all these things will be decomposed, and they're decomposed because of things like this worm and the mushrooms. And they decompose it, and they put those nutrients back in the ground. And when these nutrients are back in the ground, it gives a better fertilized ground to give better food, to give better energy back into the plants. Energy transfer efficiency limits food chain lengths. Energy is transferred between trophic levels. When one organism eats another and gets the energy-rich molecules from its prey body, however, these transfers are inefficient, and this inefficiency limits the length of the food chains. When energy enters the trophic level, some of it is stored as biomass, as part of organisms' bodies. This is the energy that's available to the next trophic level, since only energy stored as biomass can get eaten. As a rule of thumb, only about 10% of the energy that's stored as biomass in one trophic level per unit time ends up stored as biomass in the next trophic level per the same unit time. This 10% rule of energy transfer is a good thing to commit to memory. So you're going to lose, if I have 100% down here, you're going to lose 10% at each level. So we lost 10% here, 10% here, and we lost 10% here. As an example, let's suppose the primary producers of an ecosystem store 20,000 calories per meter square per year of energy as biomass. This is also the amount of energy per year that's made available to the primary consumers. Because if the primary producers makes it, they're going to make it available to the consumers, which eat the primary producers. The 10% rule would predict that the primary consumers store only 2,000 kcals per year of energy in their own bodies, making energy available to their predators, secondary consumers at a lower rate. This pattern of fractional transfers limits the length of food chains. After a certain number of trophic levels, generally 3 to 6, there are too little energy flow to support a population at a higher level. So as you can tell, I made a mistake on my part. It only does 10%. I was going the wrong direction. I apologize. So we went from, so we started out with 20,000 here. I only get to keep, I use 90% of my energy, and I only transfer 10%. So the plant gets 100%. We only keep 10%, so 2,000. We only keep 10% of 2,000, which is 200. We only keep 10%, so now there's only 20 calories, so it's your energy level. And so by the time we get to the fourth level, he's only getting 2,000. So he has a lot of food to eat to be able to get that energy. The rest of that energy is lost in heat. The rest of that energy is lost in heat. Why does so much energy exit the food web between one trophic level and the next? Here are a few of the main reasons for inefficient energy transfer. In each tropical level, a significant amount of energy is dissipated as heat as organisms carry out cellular respirations and go about their daily lives. So in each trophic level, a significant amount of energy is dissipated as heat. It means it's lost or given off. Given off. So let's take this part here. So we're giving off this stuff as heat. So we lose 90% of this through heat transfers. Some of the organic molecules an organism eats cannot be digested and leave the body as feces, poop, rather than being used. So some of it is not being used, we get rid of it through feces. Not all the individual organisms in a trophic level get eaten by organisms in the next level up. Some instead die without being eaten. The feces in uneaten dead organisms become food for the decomposers who metabolize them and convert their energy to heat through cellular respiration. So none of the energy actually disappears, it all winds up as heat in the end. The feces and uneaten dead organisms become food for decomposers who metabolize them and convert their energy to heat through cellular respiration. So none of the energy actually disappears and it all winds up as heat in the end. So I reread that twice. And I hope you now understand more about food webs and food chains.